Welcome to our channel, all friends. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe my channel and press the bell icon to stay update for new videos. Thanks. Let's start new video. Faria, my friend, met me after a long time. Before her marriage, we were from the same area, and she knew everything about my joys and sorrows. We were also classmates in college. Today, after years, fate brought us together, and she still had that same open manner, talking about her in-laws and her husband's complaints. While I quietly listened, suddenly she urged, "Embar, you should speak up too. Tell me about your husband's cruelty or your own problems at home." I replied, "No, I don't have any problems, really. Stop joking with me. I just met your husband and saw his arrogance and tyranny with my own eyes. I have also seen you hiding tears in your eyes." The truth was, when Faria came after a long time, she invited me to dinner. When I went to ask for permission from Hashmat, he got very angry. Faria noticed all of this through her sharp eyes. She asked, "What would have happened if you had accepted the love of Ali Yusufzai, our classmate, who was so deeply in love with you? You turned down his love so badly, Ambar. If you had responded to his love with love, your life story might have been very different today. You know, he has become a minister. I saw it on TV just yesterday. When I saw him, I became angry at you once again. I knew all about Ali's love for you and the customs of your father and family. That's why, Faria, I'd rather have died than live this way. You know, women in love suffer, even if they leave their whole family behind and sleep on thorns every night. What's the use of having such dreams or showing them to others? That's why I prioritize my mind over my heart." Faria asked, "How do you remain so calm? So many disasters happen around you and you keep smiling. How do you do it? How can I be like you, so calm?" I replied, "I'm not helpless, Faria. It's not that I'm helpless. But sometimes when a person becomes very wise, others start thinking that they are helpless. And listen, this is not magic that I can teach you in one day. It's a lifelong effort that life forces upon every person. It depends on the learner what they choose to learn from life, whether they smile through it or cry and complain, always leaving others in pain." Faria laughed and said, "Okay, forget your philosophy. You've changed so much, become so wise." And with that, she left, laughing and smiling. I, on the other hand, could not share my pain with her. How could I show her the wounds of my heart and soul? I had consoled her, but suddenly, memories from the past came rushing back. My mother, Sophia Bano, came from a middle-class but educated family in the city, while my father, Tahir Shah, was from a landlord family in Sahiwal. During college, they met, and what started with mutual interest and love eventually led to promises of marriage. After completing his education, my father moved back to the village. My mother kept the relationship alive, as his family had arranged his marriage with his cousin, a girl from a less educated family. My mother didn't have love or desire for my father, but she held on to his love and wore it like a necklace. My maternal grandfather and uncle were very concerned, suggesting she should accept better proposals, but she refused. Eventually, my father came to ask for her hand in marriage. Despite requests for elders to come, my grandfather kept quiet. He tried to warn my mother about the future difficulties after marriage, but she didn't listen and stood firm on her decision. In the end, my grandfather had to give in and allow the marriage. After a few months, my father took my mother back to his village, but soon after my father's health deteriorated and he passed away. My mother, already facing loss, was left to deal with it all on her own. My mother was now at the mercy of her brothers and brothers-in-law. Tahir Shah would come, promise to take my mother to the village after a few days, and then leave. Finally, after 6 years of suffering and being trapped in her parental home, my father had to take my mother and us two daughters to his ancestral home. The first wife was hoping that one day my father would do something for her, while my mother and sisters were scolded for keeping the marriage and children hidden for 6 years. My father had a great reputation among his family, but he would turn against my mother and sisters, saying that neither was the marriage for them, nor was the wife brought here for them. After that, no one dared speak of it in front of my father. But behind his back, the way my mother was treated was something only Allah knew. At home, my mother and we, her daughters, were treated even worse than servants. Despite having many servants, most of the household chores were assigned to my mother. We were given a small storeroom to live in with only a cot and some trunks. On Eid or any festival, when my aunts came to visit, my mother would stay up all night and wake up early in the morning to avoid giving anyone a chance to complain. If she ever complained to my father, he would scold her, saying, "I don't have the patience for your quarrels. I don't have the time to deal with your women's issues. I'll also make sure the children understand that they need to adjust to the ways of this house. Leave your old habits behind." On the other hand, my mother would silently watch all this and could do nothing about it. We longed to sit on my father's lap and get some affection, but my father never had time for us. People say that the second wife is the husband's favorite, but here the situation was completely different. We and my mother were treated like servants. If we touched anything, we would be slapped, and the item would be taken back. My father's first wife had 3 children, 1 son and 2 daughters. Perhaps if we had all grown up together, there would have been love or affection. But since we met later, I was 5 years old and my older brother was 10, the poison of being stepchildren was deeply embedded in our minds. Thankfully, my father enrolled my sisters and me in school. Whenever my father was kind to my mother and spent time with her, she would complain, "I can't breathe here. I'm no better than the maid. You take us to the city, give us even a single room." My father would respond angrily, "If you want to stay here, stay by our rules. Otherwise, go back to your brother's home and I'll visit you there." My mother had no support from her family because she had married my father against their wishes. Time went on and it passed as time always does. In these circumstances, we grew up. After leaving my father's house, Faria's home was the next one we moved to. We were together in school and later we went to the same college and our friendship deepened. I never saw my mother happy. On top of not being able to give the family a son, my mother was constantly sidelined by my father's first wife. Over time, my mother was completely isolated. My father hardly spent any time with her. He would sometimes meet her needs, but could never truly satisfy her emotionally. My father's first wife, who was as ugly as she was rude and disrespectful, would frequently clash with my mother, especially when she realized that my mother had been sidelined. The arguments often escalated into physical fights. My poor mother, in her helplessness, couldn't even raise a hand in defense because, as she knew, she was only allowed to stay there due to the kindness of my father's family. Whenever my father's first wife would fight with my mother, she would taunt her, saying, "Look, Sophia, one day your daughters will also fall in love, marry, and run away. Then you'll know what it feels like when you stole my husband from me by force and married him." My mother would hide her tears in helplessness and move away. Meanwhile, I was growing up. Whenever I saw my mother unhappy, I would often get into arguments with her. "Did you know everything about Baba? He had a wife and children. Then why did you consciously decide to jump into this fire?" I would ask her. "Didn't Baba tell you that he would stay with his first wife? Didn't he tell you that he would provide you with a separate house?" My mother would reply, almost apologetically, "Yes, maybe. But he didn't say that to me directly." Then I would say, "Well, the simple truth is that his purpose must have been to keep you in your maternal home, always." My mother would softly agree. "If that's the case, then why did he come here at all?" I would add. As my mother's eyes would fill with tears, I would hug her tightly and love her dearly. Baba would never show it, but deep down he was always worried. One time his blood pressure rose severely and he had to be taken to the hospital. He was admitted for 2 days. My mother was terrified and did everything she could to care for him. She had once complained about him openly, but now, out of fear for his illness, she became completely silent. Baba's first wife's care for him was all for show. "Make this special diet for him. Cook that diet," she would order. But who would cook it? My mother would be commanded like a servant, even for simple things. From childhood, I had always been inclined towards religion, perhaps because of my teacher who used to come and teach us the Quran. She always advised me to never miss prayers, telling me, "I also tell your mother to do the same. If you want peace of heart, then make prayer a habit." But my mother never felt that way. I would watch her, always busy with work, and it would hurt me. I would tell her, "Mom, you should rest sometimes." But she would reply, "No, dear, lying on the bed is not rest. I don't want to give anyone the chance to scold me for lying down." Although now that wasn't even the case anymore. If she wanted, my mother could have taken her share, But due to the way my grandmother and aunt treated her, she had lost all her courage. After completing my intermediate studies, I had applied for a bachelor's degree. It was the summer season, and there was a heavy downpour. A storm raged on and wouldn't stop. Baba was coming back from the fields when he suffered a severe heart attack on the way. He passed away before reaching the hospital. The house was devastated. As long as Baba was alive, we still had a roof over our heads. But after his death, it felt like we were exposed under the open sky. My aunt's feigned love disappeared, and to make matters worse, the very next day they told my mother, "Sophia, you should go back to your own house. The children belong to us. You have no right to them." My mother in tears protested, "No, I have the right to stay in this house with my children. I am their mother." Hearing this, my uncle said, "Look, if you have so much sympathy for your mother, go live at your maternal home. We will give you your rights there, but don't expect them from us." I immediately spoke up. "This is injustice, Uncle." He looked at me in surprise and replied, "We know what injustice is. Don't lecture us on what justice means. If you feel so much for your mother, go live at your maternal home with her. We'll give you your rights there." I realized that all of this was happening because of Baba's first wife. She had more share in the property, and she had influenced everything. So my mother took us with just a few clothes and went to her brother's home. The brothers didn't say much, but the sisters-in-law made sure to make us feel unwelcome. They would say, "We told you this fire of love would come back to haunt us. Now our girls will also get affected. Why did the aunt have a love marriage? Why shouldn't we ruin our names too?" My mother and I remained silent and listened. At our new place, all the household chores were left for my mother, and the responsibilities of work and grief made her seem like a lifelong patient. My little sister's education also got disturbed. My uncles were concerned. "I wish I could find a good match for myself, so please get me married." I had privately decided to pursue my BA. One day my uncle came home from the office looking somewhat troubled. "Where is your mother, son? Call her." I called my mother. "Yes, brother, come inside, Sophia, come inside." My uncle closed the door and looked at my mother closely, as if examining her, who was aging and starting to look ill earlier than expected. "Is everything all right?" "Yeah," I asked. "Brother, what's going on?" My uncle started. "Your brother-in-law called. He has arranged a marriage for Amber with one of his relatives. The way he informed me, it wasn't seeking permission. It was just to inform." My mother was shocked and worried. "What are you saying? He hasn't even kept us in his house. And now he's claiming some kind of right?" "I will never marry my daughter into their family," my mother replied. "He only informed you, not asked for your approval. What difference does it make if you refuse? Sophia, even if you don't agree, the marriage will happen. You don't know the people you are dealing with. These people lay claim to their daughters in the same way. Amber has inherited some of her father's property, and they are not going to just let it go. No other family will marry her off without considering the property. They will not hand it over to your family or anyone related to you. They have great influence," my uncle explained. He sat down with his head bowed. "Your mistake has put the whole family in trouble. We've been suffering from this pain for the last 22 years. The sadness and tears in my uncle's eyes were evident, and it wasn't hidden from us. I felt terrible, thinking about what would become of my life. Would I live like my mother, becoming nothing more than a servant to men with ignorant and authoritarian minds? When Faria called me, I burst into tears and told her everything. "What will happen now?" she asked, worried. "If you want, I can talk to Ali. Ali Yusufzai is still waiting for you. He will come running as soon as you say yes." That night, after much contemplation and after praying, I decided. I remembered all the taunts and comments of my stepmother, aunts, and uncles. So I lowered my head in front of my elders, unlike my mother who chose to marry Ali and live in daily agony. The next day, my uncle came and took my mother, my little sister, and me to his house. My mother was worried about where my marriage would be fixed. This matter was resolved when, the next day, Hashmat Ali's sister came with her family and placed the dupatta on my head. On the surface, she seemed warm and welcoming. My mother knew them because Hashmat Shah was a distant relative of Baba. When my mother got information about them from my elder aunt, she became very worried. "Thank God your daughter is married within the family. They are landowners. The first wife is much older, and it's been 10 years, but they have no children. He wants to marry a second wife for children. My mother's mouth hung open. So after me, my daughter will also suffer the pain of having a co-wife? Oh my God, please don't let my daughter bear the punishment for my mistakes. I was standing behind her, supporting her and pulling her aside. Mom, don't worry, you're not well. If something happens to you, please take care of yourself. Don't worry about me. I didn't know where the courage came from at that moment. My mother, surprised by my calm and composed words, looked at me, realizing that I was going through what she had gone through 22 years ago when she married against her parents' will. She had lived her life drowning in sorrow and pain. Now she saw that same pain passing on to her daughter. No, no, my Allah, I repent for my mistakes and sins. You are indeed the one who accepts repentance. My mother kissed my forehead and said, yes, my daughter, may Allah make things easy for you. In the evening, we were taken back to my uncle's house. On the 6th of the next month, my marriage was finalized. My mother thought, perhaps, despite all my mistakes, there must have been some good deed from me that has resulted in such a wise and dutiful daughter being given to me by Allah. Because I always endured every hardship and difficulty with patience, keeping everything to myself and never letting anyone know. At Hashmat's house, there was no other woman. So my co-wife left me at my bedroom. I was thinking, I wonder what my husband will be like. It was so strange that I had no knowledge of the man I had married. Odd thoughts kept running through my mind. The room had been beautifully decorated. Suddenly the door opened, and my mouth was left wide open in surprise. I quickly closed it and bowed my head in embarrassment. He was quite a handsome man, though a bit older. Assalamu alaikum, he said in a deep voice. I quietly responded, but I didn't have the courage to lift my head. You will not face any discomfort in my house, but you must respect my first wife, he said, with no flexibility in his tone, almost like a command, just like my father and uncles used to speak. The next day, as per custom, the chief maid from my father's house came with a basket of sweets and took me back to my parental home. My mother didn't make any special arrangements for me, but my grandmother and aunts did bless me by placing their hands on my head. I thought, well, this is better than nothing. Then I was allowed to meet my mother. When I hugged her, tears welled up in my eyes. What's wrong, my daughter? My mother asked, suddenly alarmed. Nothing, I just missed you, I said, wiping my tears. May Allah grant you good luck, my mother prayed. My uncle and aunt also hugged me lovingly. I thought about how easy it is to bow your head and accept someone else's wishes, to let go of your own. All it takes is a few tears that I shed quietly in my heart. Time passed, and just like my mother, I took on the responsibilities of my co-wife and everything related to the household. When I raised my head, I saw no one to look up to. Hashmat was indeed a loving person, but he had a very strict and authoritative nature. I quickly realized that I had no say in his household, especially when it came to his first wife. Thus, I kept my mouth shut. Allah blessed us with our first son, but my co-wife took him from my arms on the first day and kept him away from me. My responsibility was limited to washing his dirty clothes. My co-wife never allowed me to get close to my own son. Allah blessed us with 3 more sons, but my co-wife kept all of them under her control, and she would make sure they slept with her. I never understood what kind of fear she had. Sometimes it was so difficult for me to control my emotions, but all I could do was remain patient and hope for better days. After some time, my co-wife caught pneumonia, and it worsened until she passed away. That's when everything changed. All my children and Hashmat were now mine. Allah had finally blessed my home, and I had no reason to be ungrateful. My mother's prayers had finally started to bear fruit, even though it took time. I was happy, though sometimes the bitter memories of the past still made my eyes tear up. It was after so many years that I met Vafaria again, and all the doors of my past suddenly opened before me. My mother had endured the oppression of a co-wife because she had married against her parents' will, and I had endured the same because I accepted the decisions of my elders, even though those decisions led to so much pain. If I tried to tell anyone about the cruelty I faced, no one would believe me.